So here's the front from the Reflex 3. It's a dark and dirty day here, so I hope this all shows clearly on the video without me having to add any lights. So this all needs to come apart. Probably the first thing I'm going to do is unsolder this wire here, because that's the flash connection. We need to unsolder that so we can remove the shutter from the front of this front plate, and I might as well do that now, and then I can come back and strip the rest of it. With that unsoldered, I can carry on with the rest of the dismantling operation. Okay, let's start here. Take those two screws out. This bracket should lift off. This little buffer pad here that the mirror comes up against, you can remove that. Two spacer washers. Here is the tooth rack, which transmits the action from this idler here through to this wheel, which cocks the shutter proper, and this wheel here, which opens the blades for viewing. You can lift that little wheel off its post. Single screw here in the middle of that thing. Oh, that's loose. That's not supposed to be loose. This arm should lift out. Sometimes it doesn't want to get past this little lever here. Don't force it. The little plastic piece on the end of this arm is held in by being melted over on the back edge of here. Now basically it's not held in by much, and it will break off if you force it, so I'm just loosening that screw to lift that bracket up, and I can take this arm out. Just checking the state of that little plastic nub on the top, and it is actually firmly fixed, so that's good. I'll just run that screw back up so it nothing falls out. So here we have the gear and the little bush that it runs on, and that gear was on the right way round by the looks of it. I don't know why they hadn't tightened it up. A single screw here holds this little spring down in place. And here we have the little wheel that moves the blades into the open position for viewing. Now that has a tiny thin washer on the top of it. I'm just separating that. Swing this arm down so I can grab it. This little cam is the piece that actually does the opening of the blades. And there is a very thin shim washer right here in the centre. Often it'll just stay there while you're cleaning things. You can leave it in place. There's no advantage in fighting that thing off its post. It's just a nuisance. So the front here is held on with 4 screws. The 4 screws are up here at the top, either side of that little cam, and down here at the bottom, one down in this hole and one down in this hole. The screws should drop out. Check that you've got 4 of them. If you haven't, you probably haven't undone them all. And the front should just pull off. So here's our shutter assembly with the lens mount attached. Here's the front plate of the camera. Now before I do anything else with the front plate of this camera, I'm going to deal with this flash contact here. These are very fragile, and I'm going to reinforce this by putting some epoxy adhesive in here, some araldite. Here's what that switch looks like. The piece that holds the lower contact, the flexible one that we're interested in, you can see it's very narrow. I don't imagine that there was much strength there when the cameras were first made, given the minimal amount of plastic that's involved. But the plastic has got tired and brittle over time, and they tend to snap off here. And this contact floats, and then nothing works correctly. So to prevent that, at the rear of here, on this side of the plastic, not the long side where the contact is, I want to fill that spot up with epoxy. And I want to make sure that the epoxy doesn't run down this way along the blade of the switch, because it'll make the switch unusually stiff, and we need it to work as it was designed, which is flexing right from this point when the pressure from the capping plate is hitting it at this point. If it's locked with the adhesive all the way down to here, it's going to have to flex from here. It'll be stiff, it won't work nicely, and it'll snap off. We want to avoid that. So before I go any further, I'll find some adhesive and effectively pot this end of the switch where the tail of the 2 contacts comes out. Just fill that little void up, and that'll just strengthen it right up. And if you neglect to do that now, there's a 50-50 chance that this thing's going to break by the time you get it everything reassembled. I'll just get a little bit of adhesive. I don't need much, because we're not using much here. It's mix that up. Right, bring back in the victim. Alright, that should just run down into that void. I'm going to leave this thing sitting at an angle like this so that the adhesive does not run down that way and cause me grief. I want it to stay at that end. So I'll just prop that up. And leave that sitting there, and then I can get on with the rest of this shutter while we're waiting for the adhesive to harden, which could take a long time. Well, these pieces I'll put to one side so they don't get lost, and start work on the shutter itself. So we need to free the shutter from the lens mount. There are 3 screws involved in that. They're fairly evenly spaced. One of them is underneath that tab, but if you hold in this lock and move that lever across, you can get to that screw easily. These 2 screw heads here, visible either side of where the shaft comes through, leave those alone, you don't want to disturb those. Right, so this should just lift off. Now, on the lens mount here we've got a ball, the detent ball for our shutter speeds, a little pinion, and this plate, the cover plate. Put all those pieces to one side. Let's find another container for those. Won't be needing those again for a while, same with the front plate. This is what we're interested in mostly, which is the shutter itself. So servicing one of these shutters is much like servicing a shutter on a Retina 3C or similar camera. This clip here in the middle just needs to be unhooked. That just locks everything in. So I'm just getting the tip of my tweezers into one of those holes, stretching it out, flicking it off. That's a retaining clip off. This is the shutter speed settings cam plate. This is the latch that holds the shutter in the cocked position. That can come off its post. It's got a spring on the back of it. Make sure you don't lose that spring. We can lift out this pinion on its shaft. That's very sticky with grease, that one. Here's the internal cocking ring. That can come off. It's got a wee spring on the end of it. That one's looking a bit tired, I notice. It'll probably work fine once the shutter's serviced. Okay, so the shutter itself, we can unhook the main spring. I'll lift that off and look at the state of that. That's in quite good order as these things go. It's not as, doesn't have the tension that a new one would have, but it's closer to a new one than the vast majority that you'll strike. Okay, digging in deeper. I'll just swing the main cam back out of the way so that the speed train arm can swing across, and this screw head's visible there to remove the retard gear train. That does not want to come loose. Alright, let's get this shutter up on something solid. Here I've got the front of an old camera, a Reflex S I think, which serves as a good base to work on. Let me have another go at this screw. Yeah, it came loose that time. It's not as pretty as it should be. This screw at the other end of the retard gear train, that screw head is quite deep, unlike those on the Retina 3C camera. So here's our retard gear train. We can pop that to one side. The self timer or delay action is here. It's held in with a single screw. See if that'll lift out for us. Yes, it will. Put that to one side. I'll move this arm across as it would be when it's cocked, which allows this arm to float. Then I can unhook its spring from this end, release the tension on that. That way it won't fly across the room when I remove the screw that holds it in place. So be careful not to lose that spring. Small screw at this end of the mechanism. You can lift that off. Lift off the flash contact. This lever can be lifted off. I'm going to remove the screw from this post. This screw holds the lens tube to the mechanism plate. It also mounts this bracket which holds the main spring. Now on these shutters you need to remove that bracket to be able to take the main cam off, unlike on a Retina 3C. The shutter release lever can be lifted out here. I want to unhook that spring from there, so I'll find a pair of pliers. Now as you stretch that spring out to unhook it, it's inclined to just take everything with it. So I'll put a screwdriver behind that lever so that it can't move, and stretch that spring out only a tiny amount, just enough to unhook it. That way the spring does not get stretched out of shape, as they quite frequently are. This one, I can see that the end coil of this spring is a bit stretched looking. And this spring here on the cocking ring, the internal cocking ring, looks a bit stretched too, which suggests that somebody was a little bit heavy-handed when they were servicing this previously. Okay, so this screw here that holds down our B lever, that's got a post rising in the centre, so we need a screwdriver with a slot cut down the middle of it. Now I've got videos on how to go about creating screwdrivers like that. There'll be a link in the description. I suggest that you have a look at that. I'll take that screw off with its spring and remove the B lever. The B lever is just the same as on a Retina 3C type. Here's the return spring for that B lever. This one looks a little bit, can't decide whether that's got an extra bend in it or not. It certainly will work in that shape. It may be that someone has been playing with it. This little wheel can come off here. That's the wheel that runs off this little ratchet pull here. Pallet wheel. It's a pallet wheel is what it is. Now there's a fine spring here on this lever. See if we can zoom in a bit closer. On this lever here, it's very easily lost, so I'm putting something over the centre, toothpick in this case, so that the spring can't get away, and I'll get it with my tweezers and lift one end of the spring loose. The spring is still sitting there now, untensioned, and I can lift it out with my tweezers and carefully put it to one side. That's as much as we need to take off the front of the shutter. We need to remove the stuff from the back of the shutter. So let's get a block of wood to stand this thing on. See if I can get this camera to focus a bit better. 3 screws. Lift off the plate, and this should wriggle off without having to do too much terrible things to it. Okay, so taking this apart, we're going to split the case now, remove the mechanism plate from the case. So we've got 3 screws. Ooh. So some of these screws are tight, some of them are loose. I think I suspect that whoever had this apart was a bit heavy-handed. Now I'm just going to lift the case off. I've got the case off there. There's nothing in the case here because there's no aperture blades. I don't know what this rubbish is here. Just talk about the case for a second. There's not much to these because there's no aperture blades in there, no diaphragm blades. We just have this plate. Now that's held in with 3 screws. It's worth checking to make sure those screws are down snug. And I say that because if they ever work loose, they'll rise up and they'll catch a shutter blade. It's not a problem I've seen often, very rare to find it, but it's a problem that you can certainly prevent by checking and making sure things are where they should be. So here's the mechanism plate. This is the rear of the mechanism plate. We can see our shutter blades. Now there are 6 blades because we have 5 positions and we have a capping blade. Now the purpose of having a 6th blade, a capping blade, is to prevent the possibility of light rays striking it at an oblique angle, which can only happen when you've got a lens off the camera, passing through between and under the blades, and having a capping plate on the back effectively precludes that from happening. It's possibly a bit belt and braces, but you see a cover plate used on cameras that have an interchangeable lens, and I don't remember seeing it on cameras that don't have interchangeable lenses. Right, so we have our blades. Now the other 5 blades are all the same, they all look like this. We have one blade that looks like this. The back edge of it's cut away. Now it's cut away to allow clearance for the cocking shaft coming in at the back of the shutter. And of course the cover blade was just a narrow blade. So 6 blades in all, 4 of them are identical, 2 of them are different. Right, so I've got this up on my block of wood here. This is all virtually apart now. There are 2 screws left holding the lens tube to the mechanism plate. with experience you learn, you know, how much you need to tighten screws. Some people just don't seem to get it, and they just tighten things down until basically they use the rule tighten it till it strips and then back off a quarter of a turn, I think. But some people just don't seem to know when enough's enough. They're only tiny, these fasteners, you don't need to go crazy doing them up. So here's the blade actuating ring. Its biggest difference between this and those you'd see on a 3C type camera is it has this extended post here at the back. That extended post is involved in opening the blades to the viewing position when you cock the shutter. And here's the mechanism plate, stripped down, nothing on it. This looks relatively clean as mechanism plates go. All of this needs to be cleaned up, and I'll use naphtha, cigarette lighter fluid and a cotton bud and just swab everything clean. This little pallet here, that's involved in the rundown of the flash sync delay, and I can see a fingerprint neatly embossed on that, so that means that someone stuck their dirty finger on there, and their pre-perspiration and skin oils and so forth, it just etches in the fingerprint, and it's there for good. That's nothing, you can't get that, you can't make them go away. Alright, that's all in little pieces. We can start cleaning things up. Right, I'll start cleaning this stuff up. Just using cigarette lighter fluid, naphtha, cotton buds, Q-tips to get all of this clean. The object of the exercise is simple: get rid of any old grease, any dust and dirt or other contaminants. Lights here is a bit contrasty. I think I'll pull the curtain across. Let's try that. This shutter's quite clean inside. Suggests that it had been serviced possibly not long before the camera fell out of service. That case is looking good. Let's get onto the mechanism plate. This is the face that the blades run against. Hence it's the side that needs to be really clean and free from grease. You can see a bit of dirt coming off on the Q-tip there, so that tells you that there was something on there. The front surface here, you can see some graphite marks probably around the centre. That's where the lens tube fits over there, and the blade actuating ring runs around that edge. Just checking that everything moves freely. This is the pallet for the flash sync timer, and that's got a nice big fingerprint on it. Fingerprint is etched into the surface of the metal. That's what happens with fingerprints given enough time. There's not much coming off on this blade actuating ring, which suggests that it was very lightly lubricated. Not much at all. Bit more on this face. And I'll wipe once through the inside. See the dirt that's coming off there. Here's the lens tube. The lens tube holds the blade actuating ring, and the blade actuating ring runs around this lens tube in this spot here. Again, not an awful lot coming off. I'll just wipe through the inside of the lens tube, around the outside of the lens tube at the top. This will be greasier because this is where the speed settings cam plate, the internal cocking ring, and both revolve around there. Okay, so those parts are clean, which brings us to the shutter blades. I'm just having a look at the state of these shutter blades. If I can find a toothpick to poke at them, so I'm not scratching them to death. They look pretty good. It's not uncommon for Reflex 3 or S or 4 blades to be quite stained if the camera has been sitting idle for a long time with no lens fitted, in which case they're exposed to the air and they're exposed to any contaminants going, anything in the air, anything that gets splashed. Right, we'll have a go at cleaning those. They don't look too bad. We'll see what they come out like. See if I can flip them all over the same way so that we're doing the same face of those blades. I'm just looking to see what happens to the surface, see if any marks come off. The marks that don't come off, I'm checking to see what they're like, whether they look like stains or whether they look like corrosion. Yeah, stains aren't going to make any difference to the way the blade works. Corrosion might, because it might make them higher in friction and prevent the shutter blades from opening and closing as quickly as they might. There's a bit of colour coming off on the cotton bud, so it tells me that this was oil or grease or dirt on there. There are a few little marks on those blades. I can't feel them. If the blade's rough, if it's got a problem, when you're moving your cotton bud across the surface, you'll feel a resistance. It won't slide easily across the surface. And so when you're cleaning them and the cotton bud moves from being reluctant to slide across the surface to sliding smoothly, at that stage you know that you've got the blades clean. And whatever it was that was holding you back is now gone. Our naphtha is usually good enough to clean these blades. And these are very clean as blades go. Looking at the state of these, I'd say that this is the face that faces inwards on the camera, and the other side is the face that faces outwards. They look okay. If there was any serious problem with those blades, I would polish them with some metal polish. Brasso is what I use, and it works very well for that purpose. But there's nothing here that warrants that sort of attention.